Hello and welcome to episode 75 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Matt Gold, a multi-instrumentalist, songwriter, and producer based in Chicago, Illinois. Matt has toured throughout North America, Europe, and Asia, and is one of the founders of Flood Music, a concert series and record label in Chicago. This episode was part of Bandstand Presents' ongoing series, The Residency, that facilitates community between the Austin, Chicago, and New York scenes through collaborative shows with the Christian Wiggs Big Band, the staple Monday Night Jam at the Elephant Room, educational engagements at Texas State University, and episodes of Off the Bandstand. In this episode, we chat about the ways that various instruments evoke unique parts of our personality. We also chat about fostering a creative space for the improvised music community and the singer-songwriter scene, and a festival date in the forests of Finland that surely holds the title of The Longest Day. Moving on to our featured release this week, this is Midnight Choir, Matt's second solo album that was released days before we filmed this episode in April 2022. The themes of Midnight Choir explore the conflict between isolation and interconnectedness and interior life and relationships. If you want to support this release directly, you can head over to mattgoldmusic.bandcamp.com, and for all things Matt, all the time, you can follow him on Instagram at mattgoldmusic. On the calendar for Bandstand Presents, The Residency kicks off next week on Wednesday, July 20th, where we'll have Shimmy Tina featuring Chad Lefkowitz-Brown and Andrew Renfro. Followed the next day on Thursday, July 21st, we'll have the Christian Wiggs Big Band meets Martina Da Silva featuring Chad Lefkowitz-Brown. And then 1 week later, we'll have Wednesday, July 27th, the Christian Wiggs Big Band Year 1, as we celebrate 1 year to the day of the inception of the band. As a very special announcement, we could not be more excited that tickets to Brian Carter's Jazz at Pride are officially on sale for the inaugural show in Austin, Texas. Join us on Thursday, August 11th at 8 p.m. at Skybox on 6th, a beautiful rooftop venue looking out over downtown Austin. For more information on all of these shows, you can head over to bandstandpresents.com, and for all things Bandstand all the time, you can follow us on Instagram at Bandstand Presents. That is it for all of the mentions and announcements this week. Let's dive into episode 75. Matt Gold, this is Off the Bandstand. Yeah, like I then had to go play the gig, like on piano, and I was like, yeah. It's like, it was fine. It was just like a bunch of standards and like kind of just a bunch of blues. It was like a gospel brunch type thing. And it was cool, but it's not where I feel most comfortable. Yeah. But honestly, like that, you asked me that question kind of makes me think, well, maybe it would be.
Why not?
You know? Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Why not do something like that? But there's also the element of it of like, might just hire somebody better than me to like play the gig with me, you know, because duo concerts can be equally as, you know, intimate. Of course. You know, because there's that not only intimacy of like limited amount of audience members in the room, but also it's really with the pianist or the guitar player. Of course, it's great. Yeah, I mean, how do you like playing solo shows?
Solo shows terrify me.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me more about that.
It's a lot of responsibility, you know? I think I also feed off of the interactive quality of playing with even just one other person. Yeah. You know, I really love that. You can have some energy kind of circling within the stage and then within the audience. So you have these like different cycles of feedback and energy happening. And it's nice. When it's solo, it's like, if I stop, like everything stops.
Everything stops.
Yeah. 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 But it's a fun challenge. I've been doing it a little bit more in the last few years, finding different strategies to like open that up. I did some like improvised scores to some silent films, for example, which is almost like a way of playing duo. You know, it's like almost not a solo show at that point because I have something tangible to react to, right? So I'm like engaging with the film in that way. So that's kind of nice. But yeah, really stripping it down and doing just songs in a solo context, that's intense. I'm working on it though. Yeah. Was that something that you signed yourself up for? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're just like, I'm just going to
push myself over the ledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, I'm so curious to know, just because like I kind of said last night, and I was talking to Chris and Clark about this this morning, not on camera. We would never talk about you on camera without your explicit attendance. No, but I was talking to them about how you really seem to be in this eclectic setting of a lot of different scenes, right? Like you're doing, and I don't want to mislabel any sort of like genre or put in a box, but just singer-songwriter, stuff that has more of an indie vibe, and then a lot of stuff that is obviously within the jazz idiom as well. Like, how do you see those scenes kind of crossing over in Chicago? Like, what's the temperature on the scene there with that?
I feel like there's such a rich history of cross-pollination in Chicago. Almost anywhere you look. Yeah. If you take the AACM, for instance, as a lineage of a way to approach creative music making and create community, that's, you know, a community and a tradition of music making that's like pulling from just about every strain of music and culture and finding ways to present original work and just like push things forward. You know, I mean, their motto is like ancient to future, right? Yeah. So it's like the full continuum of things. I think, you know, I'm not originally from Chicago, but in the 90s, you know, I think there was a major sense of incorporating experimental, free improvised music and indie rock bands kind of swimming in the same circles and things like that. There's just like a really rich tradition across the city, across decades of intermingling these things, you know, and it's a spread out city, but also I think musically, artistically, people are interested in engaging with one another and kind of not building fences around that stuff. So there's a lot of collaboration and cross-pollination, and people are checking out each other's shows or collaborating on records and things like that.
Yeah, that's very cool. I remember asking Kurt Elling a question about, you know, I was like referencing one of his records from like 97, which was The Messenger, and I was like, yeah, there's, you know, I was like, I'm totally here for it. It's like killing. There's a tune where it deals more with like some yodeling and some stuff that's like a little more out and just kind of very kind of venturing towards the avant-garde thing. And I said, you know, something to the effect of like, where did that sense of freedom, especially in your 20s, come from? Whenever like at that point I was in my early 20s, and I was like, I would never have thought to like make those leaps out of fear for what people might think, because I wasn't trying to fit into somebody else's expectation of what it was that I was supposed to be doing. And he just responded, you know, he laughed, he grabbed my shoulder and he said, you know, some of that we can chalk up to youthful energy, you know, and just trying things out. He's like, but a large part of that honestly just speaks to the inclusiveness of the scene and how Chicago, for him in the 90s, in this specific anecdote, was really open to him trying a bunch of different stuff out.
Sure. I think you have to, on some level, eliminate the idea of an expectation also of what you think people expect from you or need from you or anything like that, you know? I mean, I'm just a person, I think a lot of people in my generation are, who grew up and there's just such a rich history of music available to you, you know, through records or checking stuff out or anything like that. And I feel like I'm kind of coming from a lot of different places musically. There's a lot of music that I love. And I don't think we necessarily have to, there's already so many forces in the world pushing you into a box, you know, and wanting to like put walls around what you do and what you don't do. I think if anything, it's an act of resistance to try to like express all the different things you love and the full spectrum of stuff that you're interested in and feel like is available to you.
Yeah, you know? Right. Totally, man. And it really comes across in making sure I have it right, Midnight Choir. Man, congratulations.
Thank you.
Just like fresh off the press.
It's out there, people.
It's out there. Everybody stream it. Man, like the thing that really struck me was viewing all of the credits, like on the Bandcamp, like seeing all the different credits of all the different instruments that you were playing. And I'm curious about the progression in which you kind of adopted each one of these instruments and kind of where you lie on the spectrum of between organic fascination with the instrument and also learning something out of necessity to communicate the most kind of authentic version of what you were trying to communicate, as opposed to trying to figure out how to communicate that to another person on that instrument. Like really taking all of those instruments in yourself and being able to play them exactly how you hear it in your head. What does that spectrum look like for you in terms of adopting instruments?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's kind of my happy place in music, is being in the studio and just having fun in the studio.
Yeah.
You know, that's like where it all begins for me. And I really see myself as a master of none in music. You know, that's what I really love, is just being spread really thin, working on lots of different people's stuff, but also adopting lots of different instruments and just like getting into it that way. And I don't know, there's a beautiful thing that happens when you step away from your primary instrument, you know, that kind of like frees you up. Like when I play bass, for example, I'm not thinking about the decades of time that I've put into an instrument and the sort of expectations I have for myself of a certain degree of skill or mastery or development or sensitivity or something. And I still value those things and try to bring that to whatever instrument I'm playing. But there's just an energy of like looseness and fun that comes with that, of like getting away from the thing that maybe I'm most commonly hired to do, or the thing I've really studied in a more formalized way. But it goes back to like my earliest memories of music, really, because my dad played drums. He had a drum set in the house growing up. We had a piano. He would always, or on a couple of occasions, buy the old guitar from the guitarist he would play with in a band, like in high school or college. When they got a new instrument, he'd be like, well, I'll buy your old shitty guitar. You know? And so we had some of those instruments lying around. You know, it was just kind of like a playground of music, you know, a record collection and a bunch of instruments and a couple microphones. So it was just, I mean, drums is kind of like where it started for me. I'd kind of sit on his lap and we would play a little bit like that. He'd show me some grooves. I'd try to pick up his old guitars. You know, my best friend was playing bass at the time, so I would get on his bass a little bit. My brother's a piano player, so I was, you know, learning about synths and, you know, he's showing me stuff on piano. So it's all just coming from a place of fun and following, you know, what excites me.
One thing that really struck me was reading on an Instagram post that you put, I believe in every note on this thing. That's a beautiful sentiment. I have questions, but I would love to hear just in your words, like what that means to you.
Sure. Well, I mean, in a literal sense, I'm not the only person who plays on this album, but I do play on most of it, you know, like it's mostly my own creation. And so I really feel like I gave a lot of intention to every moment on that record, you know, and really labored over it in a way that is different perhaps from, you know, a lot of records get made where, okay, we've got 2 days in the studio, we're going to get a couple takes of each thing and see what sticks, you know. And this record was much more of like a, I don't know, it was like my hermit album, you know. I kind of gave myself 5 days or so, blocked it out, set up my place, had everything I needed, and kind of like walled myself off from the world for a little while, and really got in there and tried to be very intentional and detailed about how everything was going to fit together.
Totally, man. Yeah, I mean, the thing that struck me about that is that, you know, the record making process can really be pretty intense, pretty arduous, because playing a show live, we kind of get that immediate feedback in terms of energy or applause or whatever from an audience, where we can kind of like, if we so choose, to shape and maybe pivot in the middle of a set to accommodate them, so that way it feels like it's an equal interaction, right? Where we're not compromising ourselves, but we're also making sure to see them as an equal part of this thing that we're sharing, you know, in the audience. But making these records, we do work on it for, you know, anywhere between like 6 months to like 2 years, you know, if not longer sometimes. And we really kind of, it allows for us to really dive into the most vulnerable personal part of ourselves. But at the same time, it kind of, in my case, can create an echo chamber of my insecurities, where I'm so close to it. I'm hearing it all the time. Something that I thought was super killing, now I've heard it for the 400th time with the 10th mix, and I'm like, oh no, how do I feel about this? Did you experience any of that while you were making it, or was it all just kind of like, no,
of course. I mean, we lose perspective so fast, right? Even within 1 day of trying to work on something, it's important to, you know, step away, take a walk,
Sure.
you know, breathe some air. But I definitely had a few really close friends of mine who I was kind of like, as I got closer to finishing it, I would send them some tracks, be like, well, what did I do here? You know, like, what am I looking at? You know, and it's great to get some feedback like that and get some fresh ears on it. It's super important.
What do you do to kind of, like when you said, to step away, get some air? Like, what are those activities that help you to kind of clear your mind?
Yeah, the bicycle, man. I get on the bicycle.
Really?
Yeah,
amazing.
For sure. Yeah.
Do
Get
you
on
like
the bike, take a walk. I don't know, you know, like make some tea.
Totally. What kind of tea?
Whatever helps. What kind of tea?
Yeah.
Okay, can I plug something?
Please, of course.
A really good friend of mine in Chicago/Milwaukee has recently hipped me to some Yunnan tea. It's like some pu'er tea that comes in from China, and the company is called White 2 Tea. Okay. And their tea is crazy.
Amazing.
I've been checking it out lately.
Oh man, like, well, we'll just immediate sponsor. We're gonna cut that clip out.
Do it.
We're gonna
send
tag
me
them.
tea.
Send us tea, please. Yeah, I like tea, absolutely. Man, that's amazing. And another thing about the album that strikes me too is that you're singing on the record.
Yeah.
And that again is like a whole nother level of vulnerability because it's, you know, and this is not to say anything about any other instrument, but like as a singer, you know, it's your voice. You can't hide that. You can't change a mouthpiece. You can't swap out a horn. What, or when did singing become a part of your regiment?
Yeah. Kind of recently, honestly, in terms of doing it in a formal way or putting it on records, you know? But I just follow the music.
Yeah.
I follow the music. So sometimes that means making an instrumental trio record. Sometimes that means doing something that's more like freely formed and improvised. And sometimes that means making a songwriter record, I guess. You know, it just kind of felt like that's what was happening. That's what I was writing. It became clear that it should be me singing it, you know, for better or for worse.
No, it's for better.
So that's kind of where it went.
Totally. Do you have any specific like lyricists that you go to for inspiration on that? I know you posted that thing, which was like a lot of things that, you know, you posted like that Instagram post that was like, oh, these are the inspirations that I listen to.
Oh, sure.
Are there any lyricists from that list that you pull from, or is it more of just an organic kind of process?
Yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it's been a little more organic. I definitely kind of check stuff out and I study some lyrics and I look at some poetry and even more long form writing, just thinking about the ways that people write and the different approaches you can have. But for me, it has felt more honest somehow to just kind of start from scratch and see what happens. But there's a lot of revision and, you know, different kinds of techniques that I've tried to get into to get down to it.
Totally. There's, you know, some heavy themes on the record. Like you said, you did this in isolation.
Yeah.
And kind of gave yourself, you know, 5 or so days to get this record out. I'm curious, again, talking about kind of a spectrum of where we sit on it, because I think we all kind of, at one point or another with different projects, vary on this. But on the spectrum of, you know, in terms of writing deadlines versus organic, kind of like, oh yeah, like I'm just going to let it come to me. What helps you in your creative compositional process?
In terms of like, in terms of finishing something?
Sure. Like, do you feel like the creative juices flow more whenever you have a deadline or whenever you allow yourself the time?
Oh yeah, no, it has to be a deadline.
Really? Okay.
It absolutely has to be a deadline. And even for making this record, I put those days on the calendar.
Yeah.
You know, it was just me in my place.
Sure.
But even so, I was like, okay, that's going to be the week. I'm aiming for that.
Yeah.
And I could really organize my thoughts and finish a lot of songs and kind of change some things and prepare for that in a way that if I just say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that at some point, it's probably never going to happen. I don't know. I love deadlines. Give me a deadline, please.
Okay, right now.
Before we leave today.
45 minutes. I need a brand new album. Did you do all the recording in that 5 days or try to do all the mixing and everything too?
I recorded probably like 80% of the record in those 5 days. I would say. I don't know. How do you measure that? But
yeah, sure.
Like as much of it as I could.
Yeah.
And then I spent several months kind of fine tuning and, you know, editing and mixing and changing some stuff and bringing in a few collaborators to play on it. So taking it to the finish line.
Yeah,
slowly
man.
after that.
Oh, beautiful. Well, those kind of themes that I wrote them down specifically to not put words in your mouth, of what you wrote down is like these conflicts between isolation and interconnectedness, interior life and relationships. These are themes that we've all become painfully familiar with over the past couple of years, but ultimately those can be subjective to each person. How did you process those kind of themes, and how did they work themselves into the music, like sonically or lyrically?
Sure. Well, as a base layer, I mean, it was a time of isolation, right? There's that. It exists in this time where I had to be home. I kind of had to do it by myself. I wanted to anyway, which was good, you know, for the project. It worked out that way, but the circumstances kind of necessitated that I kind of make this record in solitude anyway. Sure. But I don't know, I guess thinking thematically about the album, I zoom out a little bit and think about these things over like the thrust of my whole life, you know, and just like people around me and the world that we live in, and how this all works, and not just thinking of isolation in terms of like COVID isolation.
Yeah,
you know? But it certainly highlights a lot of stuff too, and brings up a lot of things that maybe we had, you know, pushed aside without really taking the time to examine those things.
Totally, totally. Man, the video for Coming Up Shy is so cool, because it's like, it's just mixing in these different mediums of art, right? Why specifically that medium of kind of melding together different pictures in this very craft, kind of like arts and crafts kind of way? Yeah,
well, you know, you get creative when you don't have a budget for things, you know? Like, not just going to go shoot a big, expansive music video. Sure. So I was thinking, how can I do the opposite of that and still make something cool? Yeah. And it was a time where I was just home a lot. I wasn't sleeping really great for this one couple of weeks. And I started making these collages kind of in the middle of the night. I would get up and be like, well, I'm not sleeping tonight, you know, and just get all the stuff out, start cutting things up. And, you know, in that state of mind that you get in at like 4 a.m. or something, it's pretty different from how you feel at like 2 p.m, right?
Totally.
In fact, years ago, I read this really cool book about how before the Industrial Revolution, our sleep was broken into 2 sections, right? So you would go to sleep. Then it was really normal for people to get up at like 2 or 3 a.m, do some stuff for a couple of hours, maybe write some poetry, or I don't know, go out for a walk, or I don't know. There were even like different laws to society at that section of the night. Whoa. And then I guess people would go back to sleep for a little while. Yeah. And only once our like work day was like a 9 to 5 thing, it kind of forced people to sleep that way too. Yeah. So I don't know. I was feeling the spirit in the nighttime for maybe a week or 2, just making these collages. Maybe I'd make like 2 or 3 in a sitting, kind of try to go back to sleep. And after about a week, seeing what I had, I started playing with the sequencing of it a little bit. I would listen to the track and kind of think thematically about how it might go. And I just kind of filmed it in one take like that. I was like, okay, here's my order. I practiced my moves. I was like, okay, this one goes here. This goes like choreography.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's yet another medium to consider, right? What's really interesting to me is, well, the source of where you were, you know, like kind of cutting those things out. Were you printing things out? Were they magazines? Were you, Yeah,
it's just found stuff, just magazines and newspapers and whatever I had lying around, basically.
Interesting.
Like, you know, just like a deadline is really great, a limitation is powerful, you know? So I was like, okay, I'm just going to use all of the garbage that's in our house, you know, and just like dig out a bunch of old newspapers and magazines and see what I could find, you know?
Did you want to go and try to, was there any part of it where you wanted to seek out something that you didn't already have readily at your disposal?
I think I went looking around, asking some like, you know, bookstores if they had any old stuff lying around. And I don't know, I didn't try that for too long before I was like, I'll just use what I have and see where it goes. Yeah, you know?
Totally. Is there, you know, was there a rhyme or reason to cutting out and combining any of the certain ones that you did? Or was it all just kind of like this speaks to me, but I can't pinpoint why.
Yeah, it's kind of stream of consciousness, I would say. You know,
yeah.
like I said, it was 4 a.m, so
Totally.
it's anybody's guess, you know? But it was really cool to try to make sense of it later, you know, like in the sequencing and the movement of it and how long to stay on a certain image and how one could stand next to the next one, or, you know, how the sequencing brings out meaning somehow is something I'm really interested in, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think we always have to know why we do things.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Of
Like
course.
even in writing lyrics, sometimes I've been really working on accepting not knowing where a line comes from or why a word feels like it needs to be where it is, you know? And I think that's kind of powerful. Like when I listen to someone else's record, I may not really understand what they're trying to say in a very literal sense, but it can still have a super emotional impact. And sometimes I get more out of that because there's a magical quality that's going to live inside of that for longer for me. And so if I can do that with my own music, you know, not to say like I'm just making random choices. I'm definitely not doing that. But if there's some quality that's like beyond my own total comprehension, then I'm going to be excited about it for a lot longer because I'm going to keep discovering it. You know, I'm going to keep learning about it.
That is so beautiful. You've very just like nail on the head validated 2 things in the past like 10 minutes. One,
Before you go, I just want to also say,
yes, please,
because we're here like playing a lot of instrumental music too this week, and I really feel the same way about, you know, playing an instrument. You know, it's important to get your critical mind out of the way.
Yeah.
You know, and so even though you may understand how something works musically, it's very powerful and like empowering, I think, to preserve some quality of like just intuition, you know, in whatever you do.
100%.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, the 2 things that really validated was like, one, I very, very rarely sleep through the night. I always wake up at 2, 3 a.m. And
try collaging. It's great.
I should. I'll call you up. We'll do a Zoom.
Okay.
We can collage together.
We'll drink some tea.
We'll drink. What's the name of the company?
White to tea.
White to tea. Looking straight down the barrel of the lens. We love you. We're showing you love. Show us some back. No, but yeah, like that. I've always felt, I don't know, odd because of the fact that I wake up in the middle of the night, and that just like, I'm not saying that this is a direct, you know, natural or organic kind of explanation of that, but like what you were saying about the Industrial Revolution thing and just how that used to be split up, absolutely. And then when it also comes to lyricism and being okay without everything being totally explained, one of my largest lyrical influences is The Tallest Man on Earth. Do you listen to much Tallest Man?
Yeah.
And there's, you know, some things like The Garden that, you know, are kind of thinly veiled and you can tell what's going on. But, you know, we do an arrangement in the big band of Where Did My Bluebird Fly from his first record. And there's a lot open to interpretation there. And I was like, I don't know why this speaks to me so much, but it does. And I mean, this is not exactly the same thing, but there's, I think, that Duke Ellington quote where he's like, why do I have to put a name to something that feels good? You know, like speaking like on jazz, why do I have to call this a certain thing or a certain subgenre? It's kind of a similar vibe of like, if it speaks to me, I don't have to explain myself, because that almost feels like you're seeking permission, you know, sometimes.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Whether it's your own
you're
permission.
trying to answer a question that doesn't need to be answered. And it has to feel good. Like, you know, like you say, like sometimes a thing just feels good to sing or to play, or there's like a tactile. I don't think it's wrong to, or I do think it's wrong to dismiss the tactile sensation of music making. Yeah. You know, as important. Yeah. You know, there's like a gesture to the way something sits on the guitar, or the way a word or a vowel or a line comes out of your voice when you sing it, you know, and that's worth honoring too, because that's part of how we create feeling and meaning, right?
Totally. Do you feel like certain instruments are able to evoke unique parts of you, Matt, the person?
Oh my God, yes, I do. Like I was saying about, like when I go to play the bass and I'm sort of free of the baggage a little bit that I kind of you know, unnecessarily probably put on myself when it comes to like the guitar or an instrument that I'm often expected to play. The bass is, yeah, it's just a fun place for me. Like when I was feeling super bummed out over the last 2 years of being stuck at home, it was like I could put on like a Bob Marley record or a Beach Boys record and play bass to it, and within about 30 seconds, like even before the first cut was through, I was feeling incredible.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's a powerful thing for me. I think I should have been a bass player. That's what it means. I don't know. I think more than anything, it's important to just chase your inspiration wherever that takes you, you know, and you have to be okay with that being outside of what people expect you to do. You know, like a lot of the times I'm expected to be a guitarist, but certainly for my own music, I might get a lot more enjoyment and inspiration and focus or like new ideas from pushing myself in a totally different direction. You know, starting a piece from a drum machine or a synth patch or something like that is a really healthy way to start. And it gets you, again, away from that critical zone of knowing too much, right? So like if I pick up a guitar, I see a lot of information there, you know? But if I go to an instrument where I have maybe less of a architecture or a structure for organizing everything that's in front of me, the possibilities of like an opening, right, or a fresh idea or something that's like going to excite me is kind of amplified.
Totally. I would also love to ask the same kind of question now, less specific on instruments, but between your own projects, being a sideman, and maybe something that's a little bit more straight ahead jazz, or like Sunspeak, for example. Do you bring a pretty similar approach of like, this is me, Matt, the person, the guitarist, or do you feel like those projects allow you to stretch different muscles?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I try to be myself as much as I can,
of course,
right? And we're always striving for, you know, there's always more to do. There's always further to go. I really admire most the people who can like bring their complete, genuine personalities to every musical situation that they find themselves in. You know, and that's a challenge when you're working with a lot of different people and you're trying to make your own music and things are maybe aesthetically really opposed or just, you know, far apart from each other. But I try to get in there as me. You know, it's just easier.
Of course,
it's a lot of extra thought to try to put yourself in a role. You know, if I can just show up and have some understanding of what the context is that we're going for, what we're trying to do here, but still bring my own instincts and attitudes and ideas to the table, then hopefully that's why I'm there in the first place. And I hope so most of the time.
Right. I read that you'd said that kind of studying, was it at Oberlin or I guess at Oberlin, Jamie Haddad, right? I'm really curious to hear your perspective on studying someone with a different primary instrument than your own.
It's like that same thing about me jumping on a different instrument and finding fresh inspiration. You know, it sort of takes the idea of an instrument out of the equation and we're just dealing with music. And I think that's kind of powerful. You know, I mean, the instruments are just like a way to access the information, right? But if you can participate in music regardless of your instrument, just as a human being, as a musician, you know, then for me, hopefully I can be bringing the same energy or personality. You know, I do have a primary instrument, I guess. There's a guitar where I can maybe most clearly express something completely. But if I can enter a situation just as a musician, then I think that's really healthy.
Of course, you also said that he kind of helped to usher in having your heart in the right place. Well, in an academic environment, that can be really hard, you know? I don't know if you witnessed this at all, but I saw a lot of people in my time in school, and it happened to me too for periods, of kind of losing sight of why you love music, right? You're like studying something so deeply under a microscope that it's hard to get that broader perspective of I'm here because I love this thing and I feel so connected to it, and it's just irresistibly
contagious for me.
Yeah.
You know, especially in that space, it's important to like preserve the fire of why we do what we do, you know.
Totally.
And he was a really just important mentor as far as always making that the top priority.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, right. And I would love to talk about flood music.
Sure.
Because one thing as I was reading about it, where it would be these kind of basement concerts of like a songwriter thing and juxtaposed against, you know, like an instrumental thing. Tell me about that setup in the early days.
Yeah, well, the early days, it was called flood music. It is called flood music because we were doing shows in the basement of the house I was living in at the time, which would occasionally have some water damage.
Sure.
So we wanted to, I don't know, pay tribute
right.
to the structural instabilities of my home. It started out as a basement house concert series. We now, for several years, have been presenting shows in a small bar in town, and that's been great. But basically, we felt like there were these scenes, like we were talking about earlier in Chicago. There's all this cross-pollination. We wanted to try to bring some of the improvised music community together with some of the singer-songwriter community, and put these two things next to each other for the music's sake. Let's see what it feels like to do this and this in one night, two sets, but also to bring like the audiences of those musics together. Yeah. And just create a space where people might hear something they otherwise would not have gone to check out on purpose. Yeah. You know? And we also release a lot of music as a record label. We try to do kind of a similar thing, bringing together instrumental music, improvised music with songwriter records, and, you know, people just coming from these different approaches and letting all that music sit together in sort of an archive and a library. Yeah, it just was like, oh man, you're a man after my own and every musician's own heart by like setting out to do this thing, you know, because it really takes like a strong dedication to follow through on that and to be kind of a voice and an aggregate for all of these people who you want to lift up, that you are like, it's a crime that they are not being recognized. And I think that flood music has a lot of similarities to, like, I mean, literally just this space, Monks, you know, it got this very DIY kind of familial setting to it. And it started because Colin just, as a pianist in town, like, you know, I'll say like one of the best pianists in town, he wanted a listening room environment, and Austin just didn't really have that. He started doing these pop-up shows in bicycle shops, coffee shops after hours, and then, you know, pandemic strikes, takes advantage of like plummeting rent prices, and then creates this, you know, space where he's not going to say no to like much. He's going to be like, try out your thing here. This is like, I want this to be a space for growth and for like, not the opposite of success to me isn't failure. It's like a learning experience, right? So like he allows for that to be present for everybody, and it just feels like flood music has that kind of, you know, that good-hearted nature of like, let's provide the space. I'm glad that comes across. I think I also have to kind of shout out the other folks that I run it with, of course, you know, and that's important for holding yourself accountable and enabling things to move forward. You know, I don't think I could have done it by myself, but I do run this label with a great pianist named Dan Pearson, who's now in New York City, and a drummer named Matt Carroll, who lives in Denmark now. But years ago, we were all living in Chicago doing this together, and now it's a little bit more complicated figuring things out so far apart. But I think between the three of us, we were able to kind of pool our resources and connect to a lot of different people we wanted to bring into the scene and to play the series and things like that. And now as a label, it kind of functions as a space for any of the projects that any of the three of us are involved with. It can kind of have a home there. So, you know, especially now that we're all living in different cities, connected to different communities, there's a lot of really beautiful music coming in from kind of all over the world. Totally. You're establishing these kind of, what do they call them? Like satellite offices or whatever, you know, in this way that now literally across the globe is connecting people together in a situation in which they would not be connected otherwise. What's the balance between the involvement of
kind of the company between the shows and like the label? Are you still doing those house shows?
The shows are on hold for the time being.
Sure,
you know,
of
we
course.
were going strong once a month for several years at this spot called Cafe Mustache in Chicago. It's a great little bar in town.
Beautiful.
So since 2020, we haven't brought the shows back quite yet. It would be great to. We may do that, but for now, we're kind of focusing on releasing music.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Were you doing much producing before the label came along?
Producing in terms of?
Producing records.
Producing records.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that role. I've been doing a little bit more of it lately, which is great. It's just kind of a thing that's been evolving naturally, I think.
Yeah.
I've made a number of records with some of my own projects, and some of those are collaborative projects, and some of them are just my own thing, and always feel like I'm trying to wear a producer hat in those environments, whether it's just like always being creatively invested in how the session is proceeding, or just being there to like read a score while someone else records it. That's, you know, a sort of gentler version of producing, just as a second pair of ears. And more recently, I've been working with some songwriters to actually like play a lot of the instruments on the record and help kind of like guide the songwriting process a little bit and make, you know, creative decisions about the sonic palette of what's happening and things like that. So it can take so many forms. But yeah, it's definitely been something that's been evolving over a bunch of years.
That's super cool. That was, you literally answered one of my questions that I was going to ask, which was, you know, what kind of approach do you like to have as a producer? Like, do you like to be very involved, or do you like to kind of just help to facilitate, you know, while somebody else takes the lead on the
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is for people to feel comfortable. That's where good music comes from. So if that means me taking kind of a backseat role and just being there and letting everything run its course, if everything's working, I'm not going to get in there and have a lot of opinions just to have opinions, you know?
Yeah.
But that said, I really love getting into the details of what's happening and being involved kind of from the ground up in the decision making. You know, for me, like I was saying at the beginning, the studio is a happy place for me. It's a playground of possibility, you know? So let me in, you know? I want to try to figure it out and just find new ways to approach documenting stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then now I am blanking on the record name. I believe I had it down here somewhere, but it's one that was the first one that you had like mixed and mastered, I think, from all the way through. I think it was Self-Engineering the Year of the Orbison, or Year of Orbison.
The Year of Orbison, with my great friend Jim Tashin, and he's a great singer-songwriter in town. We have a duo called Storm Jameson. It kind of focuses loosely around traditional American or North American folk music, but a lot of original songwriting in that project as well. We made that record in his apartment. It was a total experiment, and we holed up for a couple of days and pulled some gear together and just went for it. It turned out really cool, I think. We brought it to our dear friend Anthony Gervino to mix and master.
Okay, got it.
But we kind of collaboratively engineered that album.
Okay, amazing. Do you feel like then having a first foray into self-engineering had an effect on how you compose for future projects?
Probably.
I'm not sure if it's like,
I do think in general,
you know,
I really encourage musicians to at least spend a little bit of time hanging out with engineers and asking questions when you're in the studio. I see all the time musicians go to make a record, but they feel really, you know, uncomfortable to touch a microphone or move something around or ask a question. And that's not going to yield like a really confident performance, right? If you feel like you're walking on eggshells in that space, which is, I think, why we're seeing so much beautiful kind of like DIY recording projects come to life, because people can feel comfortable. They're taking the time they need to make something that they really stand behind, rather than saying, okay, we have this 10-hour day. This is how it's going to happen, you know? And it can be a little bit intimidating for people to be working in really pristine, huge, expensive studios, right?
Totally.
So I do think a literacy with that side of the glass, so to speak, can go a long way for people's own creative visions of how you might approach recording a song, or, oh, now that I'm writing this song, I can start to picture some of the choices I'd like to make when I record it.
Yeah, there's, you know, you were saying kind of this rise of DIY, and I think that Specifically focusing on like the jazz side of things, there is such a, well, I mean, this actually applies for everything. I shouldn't just pigeonhole it, but this idea of lineage and being able to go back, listen to the ancestors, listen to all these people that have, you know, been key factors in developing the lexicon to the point where we got into it. And like then now what we're adding, kind of what we're not only innovating, but what we're also honoring, you know, in a simultaneous capacity. But I think that with the affordability and the accessibility of being able to make records, and just by nature of more years of more artists and more content, sometimes, you know, for me, it can get really intimidating of like, okay, I feel like, you know, there's so much that I haven't checked out, but I also want to be present of what's happening currently and check out all the people around me. So that way, because otherwise it can be kind of like where everybody who's creating is always looking back and being like, okay, how do I incorporate this while also pushing the thing forward? But I should only speak to my experience. Sometimes it can be intimidating to be like, okay, what should I split my time between doing my homework and trying to honor and check out my contemporaries? Do you have any sort of specific regimen of how you listen to music?
Man, I don't think so. I hesitate to divide it into homework and you know,
right.
And investigating what your peers are doing. I think there are records from 50 years ago that are like infinitely more progressive than some things that are happening today, and vice versa, right? So I think the more you can see it as just a continuum of beautiful stuff that's available to investigate, the better it may be. You know, there's just so much stuff to draw from, which is maybe more what you're getting at, that it's like just so much music to deal with, you know? But I try to see that as a good problem, you know? Yeah,
of course.
Not running out of stuff to I don't know, to excite your process. And I don't know, it's just such a rich tradition. I mean, even within like the lineage, you could spend a lifetime studying like the Blue Note catalog, you know, and still like find new things to uncover there, you know? And those are like some of the most super genius recorded albums of all time, you know, in terms of how they sound. You know, you want to talk about a rise of like DIY recording. As a recorded aesthetic and like a sonic imprint, that's a really strong legacy of music, you know? Like the way that those records sound is kind of unlike anything else. So that's like really revolutionary sonic palette right there for me. You know, if I want to think about ways to push that forward or something, it doesn't mean that I'm only looking at music from the last few years or something. You know, it's like 100 years to deal with. So, sometimes for me it can be like this, because we do have that freedom to go wherever we want with it. It's kind of like going to like one of those big like buffets, you know, and you see everything and you're like, or you know, like the Willy Wonka film, you know, the kids like get into the main big open space and they're just like, just want to grab
where do I go first? And also, you know, how do I just like continue on? I really like that, you know, and I don't mean this in any sort of negative way, but I love that you kind of challenged one of the things that I said, where I said homework. It was like, I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like it's not homework. It's just like, it's part of the whole, like you said,
if it feels like homework, it's not the thing you should be checking out at the moment. You know, like I don't think, it's important to study, right? Like I had a professor in college say, every day that you're here, go to the library and listen to, you know, a piece of music that's been recorded, whether it's a symphony or, you know, some chamber music or a classic record or something like that. Like every day, do that. You'll still never catch up to everything. It's impossible to hear all the music that's out there. It's impossible. But, you know, if you're only following stuff that doesn't feel like homework, that's like, oh man, this is such a great vibe for me to just sit here with this. It's not like sitting there taking notes and saying, okay, gotta follow up on that, you know, or anything like that, then you're going to preserve the magical qualities that we need to hang on to make good music ourselves.
Totally. It goes back to what you were saying again about like having your heart in the right place.
Yeah, exactly. Get your brain out of the way, you know, like, get in there, practice and figure stuff out and push your own craft forward. Absolutely. But when it comes down to it, get the brain out of the equation.
Yeah. Man, that is inspiring and something I think we all need to hear.
Me too. I need to hear it. Say it to me. Say it to me.
Right. Get your head in the right place.
Thank you.
Brain out of the equation.
Yeah.
Because, man, you've just been putting your brain too much into it. I need things to be a little bit more mysterious.
From the heart. From the heart.
Great. All right, say it back. No, I'm just joking. Great. Let's just, like, for the rest of the
just
episode,
back and
just
forth.
like back and forth, back and forth. Yeah. You know, something that reminded me of was something I read in, I think it was Chicago Jazz Magazine, that like 9-question article thing that like I think you and Chris have done, and you know, you had mentioned in there something that made me think the whole homework versus not thing was, you're saying growing up when you were playing viola, that viola felt like the real instrument, and guitar felt like the fun instrument.
Right.
Could you comment on that? Like,
sure. Well, you know, especially when you're a kid and you're participating in music in all these kind of more formalized ways.
Sure.
Of course, you're going to gravitate to the situations where you're just hanging out with your friends, figuring it out, you know? And again, like, you know, leading with the heart, for me, that manifested itself in playing guitar with my friends and trying to put little gigs together and write songs and stuff like that. Whereas the viola was like, I took a lesson every Friday on viola for years and years. I went to a lot of orchestra rehearsals and played these concerts where, you know, I had to wear a suit and stuff like that. Sure. So when you're growing up, that feels like a little bit of a rigid environment, you know? And I don't know, part of me wishes that I stuck with that a little bit more because it's such a beautiful instrument, and I feel really lucky that I got to play all this amazing music, you know, and it definitely like set me on a path of loving orchestral music and classical music and composition. But definitely at the time I was like, my heart was just with the guitar because of the environment and the circumstance of the music making, you know, and the ways that I could really cultivate relationships in a different way through music in those kinds of settings. Are there any bucket list instruments that you want to get to? Oh man, well, I've been playing pedal steel for the last couple of years, which was a bucket list instrument for me for a long time. So I feel like I'm chasing the dream right now. I've been having a really good time. I know there's a lot of great players in Austin on that instrument, of course.
My brother's a pedal steel player.
Oh, great.
Yeah. It's
wow,
like,
it is so much fun. I'm having a great time.
Oh, beautiful. Man, specifically on, this is something that I think a lot of people could benefit from a large amount of perspectives on this, because there's no one right way to do it, but moving into a new like scene, into a new city can be incredibly intimidating if you don't know somebody already, but also more than that, you know, whether it's moving into a new city or it's like your musical hero comes through town and you want to, you know, start the building blocks of a relationship, not artificially so, but you want to open up the opportunity for that relationship to potentially blossom into something of somebody who you really respect. You know, when you moved to Chicago, what were like some of the ways or kind of approaches, if any, that you tried to foster some of those relationships? Yeah, that's a great question, because that is such a hard thing, right? And it's like, you know, no one has a little handbook that they can give you to say, here's how to like get your freelance life happening in a new scene when you move somewhere. So a lot of it is just kind of random, first of all. You know, there's a lot of luck involved, I think. But I think the best thing you can do is just be around, you know? Figure out what's happening in your town that excites you and is something that you'd want to be participating in. And just be there, right? So start to figure out how that all works. Be around, hear the music that's being made that interests you. Try to meet some of the people that are making that music. And, you know, like find opportunities to play in a casual way with people. Like we were at the session here in town last night. It's a great source of community and like a way for people to meet each other. And even from there, you might encounter a musician that you really kind of gel with. Maybe you and that person can find another time outside of the club environment to get together and make some music in a more casual, kind of low-key sort of way and cultivate those relationships, you know? I had another thought. I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh, yeah. When I moved to Chicago, I put a record out within a few months, you know? And I think it's great to, in tandem with trying to connect with people and figure out what's happening in the city, try to take a step forward that's your own voice, you know, and have something to show for that. That can be a powerful way for people to hear what you're doing and maybe have a sense of what it is that you're going for.
you know, and that can fit into the musical fabric of your town in its own way too. I think, you know, that first record that Sunspeak put out, me and Nate Friedman, the drummer, incredible drummer, check him out. I think that really did some stuff to just let people know what it was that we were about. You know, we started opening for other bands in town, start putting our own shows together, and then, yeah, some other musicians would hear that music and then hire one of us to play something based on that, right? So you're able to put your best foot forward and your own ideas to be kind of visible. Yeah. You know?
Beautiful, man. Like, just all of these nuggets of wisdom. I mean, Matt, something that I've just very quickly come to realize about you is that you're so positive. Like, you just feel like a light.
Try to stay positive. The other thing I would say is that if you can do something for the scene that isn't just you playing your music, you know, if you can book a show for somebody, if you can create an opportunity, that's like putting fresh energy and like planting, you know, something into the soil of your scene, you know, and that's really big. If everyone does that a little bit, then you have a thriving artistic community where you live.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's conducive to building community, you know, and I think that's like, there are some parts of like just inherent human nature, especially in like maybe a limited capacity of like, there's only so many gigs where people can have maybe an inkling of feeling territorial just because of, out of like almost that kind of thing when someone's drowning, you know, and somebody goes over to save them, they might, you know, just like try to grab onto the person and unknowingly like push them down, you know, because it's like, oh, I can't breathe, I need to get above water, you know. And I feel like sometimes that, you know, of course we don't always act on this, but we have this kind of sink or swim mentality of like wanting to preserve our own careers. But what ultimately we know is, like, to use that analogy, to round it out into a positive way instead of a kind of morbid, like whatever way, is that if you allow that person to support you instead of trying to focus only on yourself, both of you will get out, you know.
I think that works. I think it works, but it's hard. I mean, it can often feel like we're drowning, you know, especially when you move to a new place and you're trying to make stuff happen. But even once you've been around for some years, you know, just keeping your professional life happening is like a constant adventure.
Totally.
And if, you know, adventure is maybe the nice word I can use.
Of course.
You know, so it's hard, and I totally understand that, and I go through that all the time. You know, so I've been lifted up by lots of people in Chicago and beyond, and, you know, especially through something like Flood Music, we've tried to like just create a small opportunity for people to play music or release a record or something like that. Just put a little bit back. You know, it helps. Man, if there was a like imagination gone wild, if there was a project that was like uninhibited by personnel, finances, size, like whatever, all the different characteristics of letting the imagination run wild with an idea, what would be, like, if you can think of any, like a dream project that would be like, wow, like if I have all my resources at my disposal? Oh my God. All kinds of things. You know, I really love, when I was in college, I had a band with a string quartet. It was like a rhythm section and a string quartet, which is not a very feasible ensemble to have in the real world, you know, so I would love to do some more stuff with string players. That would be really cool. Over the pandemic, I started a relationship with this guitarist who's from Nigeria named Biodun Kuti. He lives in Philadelphia now, and he's a brilliant musician. He has been playing with Paul Simon for a few years after the late, great Vincent Ngini from Cameroon, who had been in that band for many years, passed away. And through Jamie Haddad, who was my teacher at Oberlin, who also plays in that band, he connected the two of us, thinking we might have some kind of educational exchange, you know, like he had just moved to Philadelphia. He's trying to, you know, play more just in the local scene there. And I, of course, had so much that I could learn from him about traditional African music and West African guitar styles. So we've been trying to maybe look towards a collaboration together, but it would be really cool to make that happen, and maybe even like bring in, for myself and for him, some of our peers to a situation, and I don't know, just dream up some music together, you know,
So
or do
cool.
some traveling together or something like that, you know.
Totally.
Just so many amazing musicians. There's so many amazing musicians in Chicago, let alone like the whole world to interact with, you know. So I think probably for me it would have to involve some kind of far-flung travel situation to meet some people I otherwise might not get to work with.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing, man. That's one of the things I really like about those Jacob Collier Jesse albums is that like it really touches like on a lot of different stuff from a lot of different continents, you know, with different musicians. So yeah, absolutely, man. Let me ask you the speed round question. Speed round.
All right.
No, is there like, can you think of a kind of key piece of advice or greatest piece of advice that you've been given throughout your life and career?
Yeah. It's not what you play, it's how you feel when you play it.
One more time, because I just want to let that wash over me.
It's not what you're playing, it's not what you play, it's how it feels when you play it.
Yeah. I often associate, you know, certain songs, like I was telling Chris this morning that somewhere in my memory, the John Williams piece from Home Alone transports me back to just this like immediate kind of total nostalgia and will just make me pretty inherently emotional.
Yeah.
Can you think of any specific tunes or music that evoke that same nostalgic feeling?
God, everything. Wow. So much music, you know? I mean, so many of my music feelings are connected to childhood and stuff like that. I mean, pretty much any Beatles song ever. I would say that, you know, one of the first songs that my dad taught me on guitar was Positively 4th Street, the Bob Dylan song. So that kind of like really puts me in a very specific spot when I hear that, you know, it takes me all the way back.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here's a question that does not have to be like a negative side of the thing. This is the last question I always ask. It can be just a funny story of something that happened, but we all have like gigs from hell / crazy gig stories where things are just kind of like, whether it could be like a travel related thing or it could just be, you know, musically something that went on or somebody in the audience, just like, and we've truly gotten we've run the full gamut. I know you just exude positivity, but can you think of a crazy gig story that was
like
fun?
a nightmare kind of situation? Does it have to be bad?
It doesn't have to be bad.
Just crazy.
Could be crazy.
Just kinda crazy.
Could be bad. Could be crazy. Could be funny.
Yeah. I'll tell you two stories.
Hit me.
The first one was I do a lot of work with my dear friend Micaiah McCraven. He's a great drummer in Chicago. And we were going to do a little European run a few years ago through a couple different countries. And we played a gig in New York to kind of kick it off.
Sure.
And then the whole quintet was going to fly to Finland to start the tour.
Whoa.
And we get to the airport and 3 of the plane tickets were like invalid for some reason because of the way they were booked. So only myself and the bass player had functioning plane tickets for this whole tour. And so we kind of panicked and the bass player and I got on the airplane to Helsinki, not knowing if we were just going to turn around because we wouldn't be able to make anything of this situation or not. So we flew to Finland, not knowing what was going to happen. We landed in Finland. We got word that Micaiah, the drummer, had figured out a ticket for himself. Sure. The other 2 guys had to just go home. And so he came over. We were waiting at the airport in Helsinki for like 10 hours for him, you know, to come in. He gets in, we get in a van, we drive several hours north into the forests of Finland to play at this festival. And we're like, we're sort of bumping our set later and later based on what time we think we're going to make it there. You know, we're trading slots with one band and then the next band and the next band. It's like, okay, at 4:30, 5:30, we're going to get there. You know, we're driving in this van. This guy's going like 100 miles an hour through the forests. When we get there, we jump out of the car, we run on stage and start immediately, you know.
Oh my God.
We play this gig, but it's the summertime in Finland, so the sun stays out, you know. So we played the set, it was cool. And then we were supposed to play another show at like midnight that night. Yeah. So we got a couple hours to kind of get our bearings a little bit. Sure. What just happened? Oh my God.
Yeah.
We played this set at midnight. The sun is still up, you know. And that was cool. Our bass player kind of fell asleep standing up right before we started, but we made it through the show. And then we went back to the airport, flew to Paris, and played a show as soon as we got there that night too. It was kind of the longest day ever. It was like three gigs in three countries within basically one day. But one of my favorite, just wild gig stories was when I was in college and I played in this steel drum ensemble called O Steel. Shout out to O Steel.
O Steel.
Everybody out there. One of the greatest bands of all time. And we would go on tour every spring break. We would always want to go south because it would be warmer if we could go south. So we would go to Georgia or New Orleans or something like that. And to go south from Ohio, it's really easy to go through Tennessee. We knew some people in Tennessee, some alumni of the school, who lived in a really cool commune up there, kind of in the mountains. So every spring break, pretty much, we would try to stop there and play a show. But, we'd have to drive this box truck up through the Tennessee mountains to these mountain roads full of these, steel drums. And it would just be an amazing hang, just inside the mountains in their little, almost like secret world in there. It'd make a big bonfire and we'd play outside and everyone would stay up all night and kind of dance around. It was just a great time.
What a beautiful community. That's like a, scary part of the whole thing that turned into a beautiful way of
I mean, I guess at the end of you just got to kind of be along for the ride.
Man, exuding the most positivity and grace the entire way through. Matt, I'm so grateful for you as a person, as a musician, and time is the most valuable resource that we all have. And so for you to spend any amount of time with me and us this week, let alone an entire week, is just everything to me. I'm so grateful
thrilled to be here.
You,
it's so fun. Yeah, it's so fun.
Dude, what a pleasure.